Are we chemists?
We're in business.
We're in business.
Yeah,
So, says high secret chemistry. Yeah. That's like really interesting. I mean, every day. It's really sad. This class. I signed up. You did? Yes. Oh, that's so great. So you get a real feel for it. Roll up there.
Okay.
And we've got a lot in here right now. Entrepreneurial and working on projects. Actually, a lot has happened since a lot of good things. In terms of nicer space, small. I'm really happy about that for our company. I actually demonstrators it's like we're the how we're gonna do it or whatever. Yeah. Very expensive.
Not as yet, so now, there were some groups here, so we're getting
So check it. Watch that first. Good class.
I'm trying to say something before this starts.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Right, yes. Yeah, absolutely. We're constantly hiring
This is
like did you get one?
I think yeah, we can, a drug. There's, right?
What's that in the way? Is that a chair on it? Oh. I just want to call Will and tell him to come back. Because Will went up trying an effort getting another projector, not realizing this was a just space. So I'm just running around like a maniac up there somewhere looking for.
There he is.
Oh, okay. I was calling you.
Yeah, I saw. I decided
Okay.
to ask this person.
So we will start. I don't know, how many of you have never been here before? Anybody, or how did you hear about us? I'm just curious.
Meet up on the web.
Meet up?
One of them.
Someone sent me a link because of Opentrons.
Oh, okay. Okay, cool. All right. I'm always curious about that, so I had to ask. GenSpace is sort of a new sort of thing. We call it a community lab. You could also call it a biohacker space, but that has sort of evil connotations. So we like to say community lab. Yeah, and we really serve a lot of different communities. One of the most important communities in my mind that we serve is the entrepreneur community. And so we've recently instituted, this is the second in a series of talks by entrepreneurs, mostly from the New York area, that are in sort of the area of biology, biomedical, synthetic biology, all that sort of thing, or their supporting services. And we would like the space upstairs, which is an actual functioning working lab space, to be used by as many people that need a cheap place to do a proof of concept experiment as possible. So that's one of my dreams, is to facilitate that sort of grassroots entrepreneurship in the biosciences. My background, I have a PhD in molecular biology, and I worked in the biotech industry for many, many years. And I love the feeling that these entrepreneurs are bringing to the space. And also, a lot of them are originally from different disciplines, and they're bringing a fresh eye on problems that are old that no one has solved. And that's one of the things that's great about Will's company, is he fell into this niche that was completely empty. No one had even thought about tapping this potential market. So it's kind of cool. If you want to know more about GenSci, we have classes where anyone can walk in and learn to do genetic engineering, or a lot of other interesting things. We had a workshop this last weekend, interfaces. So we had, one person controlling somebody else by, moving their arm and things like that. And we also have talks from working scientists and artists working on the art science interface. We have a big artist community that uses the space for bioart, biomaterial, genetic engineering things. We also support a lot of high school projects, like we're doing a team for the International Genetically Engineered Machine Competition, where about half the team is local high school students. So we wear a lot of hats. And if you're interested, we'll go up to the space after the talk and you can see it if you haven't seen it. So without further ado, I'm going to let Will take the floor. Will is one of our oldest members, actually. You've been a member for years, yeah. I mean, and really supported GenSpace all along on the concept of this open access biolab. So
GenSpace has supported Opentrons and all of my work too. So thanks, Ellen. I really quickly would love to just sort of get a quick show of hands. Who's like a biotech person? Who's a student? Entrepreneur, kind of money. Well, and founders of Opentrons LabWorks thought they were building. And I can't look the zoomed in. That's what it looks like. It's a lot of the work done in a biology lab today, as many of you I'm sure know, is manual pipetting, moving very precise amounts of liquid around from vial to vial. Or you can get a $100,000 robot and hire a lab tech automation engineer to build the robot protocols for you. But we're building a $3,000 machine that does the pipe. So I'm just going to give what we're doing as a company, but then Ellen asked me to do a more like personal story. So it's going to be not like a typical entrepreneurship sort of pitch or anything like that. So if it's boring, just like pretend like you're sleeping and I'll see that and I'll go faster.
I think it's highly relevant because a lot of successful companies are built on the passion of the people that do them. And without the passion and without the context, you don't have it. So I thought yours was an interesting journey.
We're also the first startup out of GenSpace. Yeah. So, okay, I'm just going to go into the presentation now because that's what time it is. So this is my contact information. Feel free to email me. But we're going to go through sort of my story and how I became an entrepreneur and how like GenSpace sort of helped launch that process. And my background is in electoral politics. I ran campaigns, and so I'm going to go through a bunch of sort of lessons that I learned on the campaign trail that brought me to technology as a more effective way of sort of creating change that I want to see in the world. So when Ellen asked, she also said to have a lot of personal pictures. So I got back on Facebook for 8 minutes and like pulled out a lot of pictures. So these are some real troves from the past. But to give some historical context, I think it's interesting to think about how the public thinks of the government through the lens of these two television shows. When I grew up, I could quote every scene of The West Wing. And Josiah Bartlett, the president, was the paragon of like rational decisions and like hard choices. And if everybody worked hard in the government, they would really like change this. And I think that the transition from 2006, when I graduated from high school and like really started working in politics, now what we're focused on is politics as a way of sort of the corrupt becoming more powerful, more rich, fueling it, and sort of it's like sexy and interesting, and people sort of connote with the government and politics today. And I think that the transition from that in politics sort of went through. And so my story, I think, working in politics, a little bit of how. Okay, so this starts in Des Moines, Iowa. A lot of you guys might remember that being like one of the craziest Democratic caucuses in recent political history. And that's me and my still current best friend and roommate, Malcolm, with Elizabeth Edwards. We were working for John Edwards in Iowa, and there was this upstart freshman senator from Illinois that nobody had ever heard of. They had like change we can believe in. And we were going around passing out to voters these like 90-page booklets of like law proposals and stuff. And so this was really at the point where for me, and I think a generation of people, we sort of woke up to the idea that there's a lot, that this rhetoric and this hope was really sort of hitting fertile ground. And that really sunk into me and Malcolm as we were precinct captains of the caucus. And the caucuses, nobody votes, they go and stand in corners. And the way that it works is only a certain amount of delegates are awarded. So all the smaller parties, like the Joe Bidens and the Dennis Kucinichs, they're there for like the first rounds, but then they peter out and people have to separate into the larger camps. So by the end of it, there are the three, like Obama, Edwards, and Hillary. And the thing that turned me sort of so on to the hope and change trajectory, and I think everybody else, was just the very calm and collected sense of purpose that we hadn't seen for the last decade in politics that the people who were following Obama really had. So that brought a generation of people into the political process to both work in campaigns and vote for the first time. And later on in that year, when the presidential cycle was actually going on, I didn't work on a presidential campaign, I worked on this congressional race. We were in Idaho, in the first district, which is the long one. It's actually on the left side of the map. And it's 2 time zones because the north side of Idaho is in Washington and like is facing economy, and the south side is like Utah facing. Driving up and down there, I was the body man, so I spent all my time with Walt Minnick, who's the dude smiling in the middle. And that picture is of the exact moment that Obama won, which was sort of, and we won that election later on that night by 0.5% of the vote, which were the Democratic campaign to win in the most Republican district of any Democrat since Abraham Lincoln. Still, because Democratic that's not the word, landwave is not the word. Landslide has happened like that since. So I'm just sort of, this is like the real upswing, I think, for me and for a lot of my peers who worked on the Obama campaign or on other successful progressive campaigns across the country. And it really trained a lot of young people that they were important in the political process. And I think that it still marks the largest youth voter turnout in history, 2008. And that was a substantial part of the new sort of coalition that Barack Obama had put together. So we really felt like a part of the political process at that point. But then, this is me in 2009, and we're doing youth voter activation. So the story that I like to tell here is, before we were all working on serious campaigns or for the presidency. And then when Obama for America merged with the Democratic National Committee, all the young people lost all their jobs. And basically went from being a side group. Sorry, I'm going into politics for all of the biotech people, but this is my story and how I've sort of come to biotech, believe it or not. So I'm gonna just keep on chugging away. This is really when a lot of us realized that we were a separate sort of, we were treated then as a separate group, the youth vote, and the Democratic National Party no longer had a youth get out the vote focused thing. So that led some nonprofits that I was a part of to we dressed up in cardboard boxes to get young people to register to vote, which was not necessary to get young people to register to vote in 2008. So something was changing. And then this is after graduating from school, and when I really sort of started moving up the totem pole and really disenchanted very fast. Those are the jobs that I had. I went from as sort of a cog in the Democratic machine to managing 12 field operatives across the state, to then controlling hundreds of thousands of dollars of political donations a year at the board of directors of a big PAC. And moving up there like that, I pursued it so sort of doggedly because I thought that once you got to that level, you got to sort of call the shots and make a change, and that's politics, right? You win and then you get to make a change. But it really wasn't the case. It was, you were just a bigger wheel in the same ways. It's frustrating for a number of other people, sort of peer group in politics. And a lot of us started to leave politics. And just for some historical context, this is what was going on in politics. The Tea Party was on the rise. And a lot of the things that we sort of campaigned on in 2008 were not working out. Okay, here to sort of zoom out. I think that there are, a lot of those historical reasons that I put up there are specifics for why people got out of politics at that moment, who had been part of this sort of new groundswell of young people in progressive organizing. But I think that there's a more systemic problem with how politics is done today, and it has to do with the organization of in hierarchical systems. So there's the candidate at the top, and the chief of staff and the communications director, and then everybody branches off like that. And it's so bad that, so there are times when I would bring friends to events that they cared about. One specific time was an event about student debt for students that had hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt, and they wanted to talk to the representatives about it. And I got almost fired from that job because I let my friend talk directly to the reporter about their personal story of debt, which ended up being the headline piece, which is how my boss found out about it. And I hadn't forced my friend to volunteer to use our campaign talking points, and that was the problem. And so instead of sort of empowering this individual with a compelling story to spread it and use it in politically strategic ways, it was a problem that they hadn't just regurgitated the line that was passed down from on high. And so that to me is one story that sort of illustrates that the party structure and the sort of hierarchical way of organizing politics was just not an effective way of actually getting messages out there in a strategic way. And I think that also at the same time, in 2010, that's when we saw the Tunisia and Egypt Twitter revolutions. So people were organizing for the first time using peer-to-peer communications and digital technology. And these kinds of networks were being seen to, for the first time, rise and overthrow hierarchies. So I was tired of electoral politics, and there seemed to be this global revolution on the rise. So I got my ass to New York and became part of Occupy Wall Street, which is what I did for 9 months. They're pretty much full bore. This is us being arrested on the Brooklyn Bridge. And I think Occupy Wall Street was a really interesting historical moment in America and globally. I don't think it was a success in terms of a revolution, obviously. I think it was instrumental in, first of all, there have been a lot of polls that show that things like the 1% as a term or too big to fail as a term really spiked and became a part of political discourse as Occupy Wall Street became more of a big deal. And those kinds of inserting of rhetoric into the political discourse, I think, is a really useful legacy of Occupy Wall Street. But the most important legacy, I think, of Occupy Wall Street is that the generation that had sort of been put to work for the first time for the Obama campaign started to work for itself for the first time under Occupy Wall Street and realized that sort of these peer-to-peer ways of organizing could create power and be effective. So that led me, so going back to this graph, I want to add one point, which is that it's technology that empowers individuals with network production that allows for the network to arise. So this is going back into the more general and technology piece, because really here is when I started focusing on technology as a political empowerment device. And without Twitter, people wouldn't be empowered with the means of producing the news. And you can see, without SoundCloud, people wouldn't be empowered to make music in the way they are. Without YouTube, people wouldn't be empowered to make video in the way that they are. And so you can see that these networks arise to overtake traditional hierarchies in places where technology enables peer-to-peer production. So I started really thinking about what types of tools can we make to create new types of networks and enable network communities in new places. And one of the things that all my friends are writers, and there's no jobs in academia anymore for young people. So independently minded, like people who would otherwise have gotten tenure and written all their crazy books now don't really have a platform to write things. Anyways, we launched this, the New Inquiry, which is a platform for people writing about independent books, and it's all funded by subscribers. So this was sort of my first foray into building a platform that pays my friends rent and empowers people to do their work. But from here, it's really when I started thinking about more seriously the types of technology that we're empowering. And so now we're in sort of 2011, and this is when Chris Anderson famously said, the editor of Wired and now CEO of DIY Drones, 3D Robotics, said that bits were turning into atoms. So this is when, the YouTube that allowed people to make cultural artifacts, SoundCloud let people make cultural artifacts, but now things like MakerBots and other digital fabrication machines were starting to let people make physical artifacts. And the types of network effects that were taking place in digital media communities were starting to take place in the maker movement and in the open source hardware movement, et cetera. And this really sparked the idea in a lot of the sort of politically minded technology technologists of autonomy, like being able for individuals to make their own stuff, which is a inherently sort of politically revolutionary act, if you think about it. So I went to school and started learning about how to work with these platforms. This is just a random picture that I found at an ITP winter show holding Hannah Mission's old eye tracking device. And so this is also when, so ITP is a program at NYU that forces people like me with no technological background to learn how to code and learn how to develop hardware, learn about design principles. And it's a 2-year program. Opentrons was my thesis. This is also when I started going to Gen Space. So I was on the total bio track when I went to college. Actually, I got 5s on all the APs and passed right into the 3rd year weed out class where you have to memorize every phylum of every worm, and I just quit and went to politics. But it was a passion for a long time, and Gen Space let me get back into it. And I took a class with Ellen in 2012, introduction to, the biotech crash course was the first one. And I started learning how to pipette, do the manual pipetting. And that's when this thing, pipettes just clashed in my world, and I was like, why can't I just hit run on this protocol and just make it go? And so that was really sort of, and that's the thing, is that's an automation step, for me, that does something that I couldn't otherwise do. But the real revolution there is when I started realizing that people could then share their protocols and share their experiments. And instead of having to sort of go and become an expert in a protocol by reading the primary literature, you could just go download a file and hit run, and it would combine all the right reagents for you, and you would have the results you were needing. So that's why Opentrons was born. This is our machine. You were supposed to see it earlier online, but it wasn't loaded. But this is our Kickstarter video, actually, and also our website. As you can see, it does liquid handling, moving around precise amounts of liquid. So this is another random. That's a funny grin. I think it's because it's that huge coffee sitting there on the table as well. This is the day 3 of the ITP show a year ago, or day whatever, how many days that is. It's feels like 8 days. But that's the old machine. So this is the new machine, and that's the old early prototype from a year ago. So this is when we sort of transitioned from my life before startup life to my life after startup life, because this is when I meet. So Chu and Nick are who built this early prototype, and I was the first customer of the Opentrons, that machine. So this is Chu and Nick, my co-founders of Opentrons. Nick is a software guy. He's the one in your yellow shirt, and Chu is a mechanical engineer who's been working in biotech for the last 20 years and has been running the huge industrial scale robots for the last 10 years. And he's also done the startup thing before, so he's the CEO. And yeah, so a few general points that I wanted to make about startups in general before sort of going into Opentrons startup story. One important thing is that not every cool project should be a startup. And that's hard to remember sometimes in this crazy environment of fundraising and everything. But startups are for projects that need to grow and get users and like get on people's desks really fast. And it's a specific thing that it's not just building something cool, it's building something that's going to scale and be a big tool. So yeah, that's then the flip side of that is that I think that startups are also a really interesting like historical institution. They're unique in that they're exactly structured just to do that one job of spreading a new digital technology as fast as possible. So as like a, you know, an activist, a historical actor, like looking at a startup is a really like interesting new thing to try because it's such a finely tuned machine in a lot of ways, and the ecosystem around growing them and like teaching people how to do them is fleshing out so much with all these accelerators and incubators and stuff like that. And so then, yeah, that leads me to the third point, which is that now is the time to start a startup. If anyone here like came with the question of like, should I do a startup now? Yes, because it's never going to be easier to get your idea in front of people who are ready, willing, and able to give you the resources you need to make it happen. And so that leads me back into our story, which is that there's also this proliferation, not just of like free sort of investment capital and interested VCs in the earlier stages of the process, venture capitalists in the earlier stages of the process, but there are also all these new programs, these accelerator programs. So Y Combinator was like the first one classically in Palo Alto, and it's all started as all software. But we went to this one called Accelerator, and we chose that one because it's in Shenzhen, China, which is the core of the hardware ecosystem globally. Like every iPhone is made there. Every MakerBot 3D printer is made there. So yeah, so this is a picture of us last July going to Shenzhen to spend the summer building the robot. This is just a few pictures of Shenzhen. This is like one of the 20 electronics markets. All those people are selling is like components, like resistors and capacitors and LEDs and systems on a chip. One of the reasons that building hardware in Shenzhen is so compelling is that it's so fast. Like here, if you want to try out a component, you go on DigiKey and you find it, and then it'll be there in 3 days unless you pay $20 for expedited shipping, and it'll be there tomorrow. Here, you just pop over to the local vendor and you like get the thing and you walk back, and it's come directly from the factory. So if you need 10,000, they call the guy and you get 10,000 tomorrow. So there's one of the sayings is the factory is your workshop in Shenzhen. So it's not like you have your workshop and then you take the thing from your workshop to the factory. You're prototyping actively with the factory. So that going, as soon as you get your first one off the production line or whatever that you like, you just can go from 1 to 10,000 to 1 million pretty directly. This is Accelerator visiting a injection molding shop. And this is me and my friend Andy at Seed Studio, which is an open hardware board manufacturer. You have to wear those pink static free jackets. And then, so we spent the summer sourcing and building the robot, and then towards the end of it, it became time to start selling the thing. So this is behind the scenes shooting that beautiful Kickstarter video that I showed you. This is, so they're setting up the underglow. I just get a kick out of this because it looks really pretty afterwards. So after we went to Shenzhen last summer, we came back and did a Kickstarter. We sold 43 robots, $126,000. To universities and biotech companies around the world. I put this slide up from our pitch deck, basically, just to give you guys a sense of some of our stats today. And right now, we are very close to closing a $1.5 million seed round, and we've brought on our first sort of technical hires, and we're ready to move into a bigger space and ship the first 30. We've shipped almost 10 robots today, and then the 30 after that will go to all the rest of our Kickstarter users. So that's basically all I have prepared. I would be more than happy to answer any questions or go into detail about anything else.
Let me just, I want to roll it back a little bit. There's one part that I thought was really interesting, and you kind of skipped right over, and that's how you developed these, what I would call more strategic partnerships. I guess that's sort of a very highfalutin way of saying, you fell in with good people.
Totally.
So when you were at ITP and you wanted to make this thing, where did you find Chu?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I think that really it does lead back to GenSpace and the community. Without that, we would not be where we are today. I found Chu on the DIY Bio listserv. I read that thing religiously. It's where everybody puts hey, have you tried this way of transforming E. coli in your bathtub before? And people say, you're stupid, don't do it like that. But Chu had put up that old prototype with a robot and said hey, I made this thing, really interested? And everybody was like, that's so stupid, why don't you just buy a biomech? And he's like, it's $100,000. And I was like, hey, I like that thing. And went and visited his lab, which was in Pennsylvania, with Nick, and that was in the end of 2013. And then bought I was the only they had just sort of been prototyping and they had their prototype. And I was like, so how do I buy that? And he's like, well, I could source one for you. So he sourced one for me, and that's the one that we worked on for my thesis. But it really a lot of the trajectory that we took from then to now has been because we've been connected with so many great minds in the space. I mean, so one of the keys for us has been Tom Knight, who's on the board of GenSpace. People say he invented the term synthetic biology. He wrote he wrote some of the first lines of the internet, ARPANET at MIT. And now he's at Ginkgo Bioworks, founded Ginkgo Bioworks, but he was at iGEM, which is the big sort of competition of synthetic biology labs every year up in Cambridge. And, talked to us for a long time and figured out what we were trying to do, that we were trying to make biology digitized and reproducible and alleviate a lot of the drudgery and error of lab work. And he just sort of fell in love with the story and started telling everybody he could, hey, these guys are doing amazing things and they've done the hard part, which is source the robotics in China. They can make 1,000 of these, next month if you need them to. And he introduced us to one of our biggest funders to date, and introduced us to Drew Indy, who is one of our most important users, chair of the Stanford Bioengineering Department. And the way that we met Tom in the first place was through Ellen, and through GenSpace. So, and I think that that's another important thing to think about, in terms of launching a startup, is it's not just about the sort of your fundraising trajectory. Really, it's about building community, and starting in such a rich community as GenSpace or another sort of community hub like that, I think is a real boon to growing fast and doing smart things. Anybody else have any questions about anything?
I read in the Wired magazine article that the cost of making this system is now about $2,000. We're selling it for $3,000. So, what is the plan in terms of going forward? Could be even perhaps more.
So, did Wired say that we made it for $2,000?
Yeah, something like that.
We make it for under $500. So it's nice, it's a really good margin. But in terms of the business plan, that's really just the start of it. We could sell the machine for what it does. Labs. People are sharing their protocols on your digital platform. It becomes that much more valuable of a thing. So we're really looking at this as more of a digital platform and less of like a straight hardware company. And we know that there are tons of models for monetizing communities in startup land out there. We have a lot of specific ideas about that too, if you're interested.
Yeah. I was just thinking of, if you scale it up now, the cost be going down to whatever number that you have better features,
Yeah.
perhaps.
Absolutely. I mean, part of the genius of Choose sourcing strategy is pretty much everything is off the shelf or digitally fabricated. So there's no big molding costs, no upfront. Like with an injection mold, you expect $35,000 plus for your injection mold for like a simple plastic case. Like the thing around this is injection molded, and that's a hugely expensive mold. But because we only use things that are laser cut or directly off the shelf, we can just, our costs pretty much linearly scale. So the 10,000th robot will cost pretty much the same as the 10th robot, which is good because we're right now at the 10th robot.
You mentioned that Chu is the CEO.
Yes.
Have other positions been identified within the company? And for example, where do you fit? What would you?
Yeah, I'm a co-founder.
Obviously, in the early days, you're
Yeah.
doing lots of things, but out of curiosity, what have you done?
I mean, I think on paper I have chief community officer, which is something that like a lot of big companies have rebranded their chief marketing officer as chief community officer, which is sort of how I heard about it in the first place. Is like, but I do a lot of sales right now. I do a lot of sort of product visioning and a lot of the recruiting. I'm not on the technical end, except in terms of sort of managing the product and like shepherding development, but I don't develop.
You showed Andy in one of the earlier photographs, and I still see him around from time to time. Is he still?
He's always been part-time, and continues. And and then we just brought on our first like real recruitment hire. This woman named Michelle, who's a hardcore web programmer with like decades of experience and a lot of experience in domain-specific languages, which is really cool because that's basically what we have that represents the protocols digitally that the machine needs to execute. So she'll be doing a lot of work on sort of the compiling of runs for the Opentrons to execute.
So you mentioned Michelle being very important in that area. What do you see as the other key areas that you're trying to fill in the short term?
Good question. Let me first answer by telling you what we're building right now, and then it'll make more sense why we're hiring. So the first step of the hardware is really like it's coming off the line. So that means that we'll need people to support our customers. So that will be one person. Then, but because also the hardware is coming off the line, we need to ramp up the software development. So most of the people will be in the software, both in the sort of back end, like how do you turn a biology protocol into a piece of code that a robot runs, and then how do you like share that easily around? That's a big, interesting question. But then there'll also be sort of more typical like web development, deployment people, and then a lot of folks with both biology and software knowledge will be doing a lot of the protocol development of the actual experiments that we're shipping to users.
So,
Yeah.
so, how much of the software, has been developed, as of yet? And also, it seems like you're trying to create a tool that's accessible to, lots of labs and users who probably aren't that, IT savvy. And so are you putting any thought into, kind of creating a really end-user friendly tool?
Yes, for sure. So let me show, I want to just show what Mixed Bio, we have a little, okay, so this is just an idea of the, basically people can search for the protocol that they're looking for, so like PCR prep, and then hit search, and then you find one that you want to run. And then you say which specific things you need to do, and then put in how many samples. This represents like a bed layout that the machine will spit at you, and then you're like, yeah. So it's all about the user experience for us. I think it's, because we're open source, the user experience is really one of the only, like, Peter Thiel would call it a moat, to like hold on to our customers from other people who would try and do the same thing. User experience is key to our whole thing.
And to follow up on that, some who might want a more flexible, platform, so they'd be able to just kind of design their own protocols too?
Yes.
Okay.
This is what's going to be rolled out first are some sort of pre-wrapped generic, basically protocols that everybody will run one time, and then unwrapping more and more features that allow for more and more customization is definitely the plan. We just had our first birthday and we have 5 of the robots in the wild, so we're definitely working towards all these things. We're also working with Autodesk, which is they make like engineering design software and architectural design software, and they're really getting into biology experiment design software as well. So they're a potential investor. They bought 3 robots. So we're trying to figure out how much of the design side we'll do versus they'll do, and we're probably just mostly going to be on a lot of the running it and both pairing the run with reagents and sort of validating when processes work and stuff like that. We're going to try and stay on the execution side as much as possible versus design.
How do those protocols compare from the user entry, user access, et cetera, with other types of systems like this? For example, I'm thinking of like transcriptics has the ability to do, in a sense, what you're doing in the cloud. So
Yeah.
I don't have to be in the same room with the reagents and the machine, whereas in your model you would be. Is there a commonality between those two?
Yes. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Transcriptic, it's a startup in Menlo Park that they call themselves a cloud lab. So they're like the Amazon Web Services for life science. They have a robot that's like the size of this room that basically moves things from a refrigerator, puts it in the liquid handler, takes it in the liquid handler, puts it in the incubator, takes it in the incubator, puts it in the plate reader. And people just upload their experiments in software to the cloud and it executes them for them. I think these cloud labs are awesome, and we use pretty much the exact same data structure to represent our protocols as Transcriptics does, partially because it's a really well thought out and open piece of software, and partially because if they're the cloud, we're the PC. And nobody immediately deploys their web app to Amazon Web Services. First, you test it locally. And people need to, like, one of the biggest problems that they have with people using their platform is that they only use it to do like tens of thousands of runs, and getting to the point where you feel confident to hit enter on 10,000 runs is like a big stretch. And so having something to prototype on your own bench with first, so then you can do it 10 times, and you do it 100 times, and you can do it 10,000 times. But for the 100 times, you do it on Opentrons, and it makes, yeah. So we're working closely with them to sort of pay that pipeline. This.
How hard or how easy is it to translate a protocol that like a human's been doing in a lab for lots of decades to a digital robot protocol? I mean, I would imagine it depends on the protocol, but like, are you finding that really easy, or how does that go?
Yeah, it's definitely not really easy. It's something that, you know, has been a piece of academic inquiry for a long time as well, like translating protocol, like scaling them up, and digitizing them and stuff like that. And companies like Transcriptic represent a big step forward in the sort of software stack to make that possible. But there's still a huge difference between like a person as hardware and a robot as hardware. And that is a lot of like the work that we've been doing over the last 3 months, which is just sort of running a protocol over and over again and seeing what you have to do in the details to make it function the same way as a person would. So one like really good example that Ellen warned me about like a year and a half ago, and it's really true, is when you're pipetting, a human will tilt it and hit the edge of the tube so that the last drop flows off. A robot goes only directly up and down. So one of the ways that we solve that is the robot does a little four-leaf clover like dance thing every time before it leaves the well. But so that's a really long way of saying that it takes work on the front end to figure out how to reproduce the same actions that people do. But now that we have the platform that's pretty much figured out, it's really just about writing the software that says like transfer from well A to well B at this volume. And yeah, so it's getting easier and easier, but it also depends a lot on the protocol, which you let with. But it's very true.
Yeah, I mean, I can jump in. Ginkgo is also heavily invested in automation. I mean, every tube is barcoded, every rack is barcoded, and everything just moves through the machines. And you come across all sorts of strange things like, it's not that easy to reproduce, say, if you're doing a plasmid prep, which is an operation for those who don't know it, but that's very, very common. It is, you want to prepare this DNA and you want to extract it from cells. And you have to go through a process where you break the cells open and then you do some agitation and some centrifugation and stuff, and you eventually end up with liquid that contains the DNA that you want and not what you don't want. And things that seem very trivial for a human to do, like to do the mixing step, it turns out if you want to do it in a small chamber and you don't have like a human hand sort of turning it around and doing stuff, you may have to actually change the shape of the chamber to make it more efficient at mixing. And if you spin something in a centrifuge and you get a solid pellet on the bottom, a human will turn the tube and use their eyes to see where the pellet is, how big it is, because sometimes it differs, and make sure that they pull out every last drop of the liquid, whereas the robot can only do what it's been programmed to do, and it can't deal with sort of the inconsistent results that biology generally does. So there are a lot of little nuances that Will and other people who are doing this sort of stuff are working through.
Very true.
I was wondering something about whether or not you plan on working with your, initial investors who are now going to have these first systems to kind of work out some of these protocols to kind of utilize that
Yeah.
power that you have and that you have beta testers, right?
Totally, I mean, that's very much how we're doing it, so we have, as I said, 5 robots in the wild, and each one of those is sort of a specific project that's a protocol that we're developing. So Autodesk Research is working on loading gels. Stanford is working on a qPCR prep. Modern Meadow does a PCA assay. And the other guy is just an investor, so he's just playing.
You mentioned this is now for pipetting, which is the mixing step. What about separation, electrophoresis and the like? Is there any plan to do other steps?
Yes. One of the coolest things about being open source and running on a Raspberry Pi is that you put a Bluetooth dongle on the Raspberry Pi and you put the Bluetooth dongle on your magnetic bead separation unit or on your heat deck or on any of these things, and then you can pretty easily incorporate that into a run. So we're thinking of the platform as modular, and we're going to be selling these upgrade units that we produce in Shenzhen that give the robot additional functionalities. And the first two are the one that does magnetic, it engages a 96-well plate with 96 circular magnets and then disengages for DNA extraction. And then also a heat and cool LTA device.
This Raspberry Pi.
Raspberry Pi is a little Linux computer, $30, and a Linux computer is an open source PC and this one's like this big, and it runs our robot. It's really cheap.
Okay, so. So thanks, Will, and please help us eat some food and drink some wine, and in a few minutes, if anyone wants to see Jen's space, you can go upstairs and I'll show you the space. Thanks for coming. And we subsist on donations. I always forget this. There's a donation box here. So if you've got, a couple bucks, put it in and help keep us, keep this nonprofit that is Jen's Space going.